Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so as I said last week, I think this week's episode of the show is hopefully a first. Certainly, I think it's a first for YouTube review, although I don't think I've seen any other blog reviews or anything like that. There may well be some, but anyway, I am introducing a brand new independent bottling company. Well, totally brand new. They've been around for a little while. Called Skene. Now, interestingly enough, Skene are pretty much like a number of the other independent bottling companies, like Single Cask Limited and Bottlings Whisky that do their range. That they started off their life as a broker, and in this case they were established in 2014 by a chap called Andrew Skene, hence why it's called Skene Whiskies. And anyway, the interesting thing about the whole independent sector for me at the moment is that it's really alive and kicking. And if you go back a few years to sort of post credit crunch, there was all this doom and gloom being reported in the press and blogs and all this kind of stuff, and distilleries were no longer going to be selling their whiskey. There'd be a dearth of casks on the market. Independent bottling companies would go to the wall and all this kind of stuff. And what actually has happened is totally and utterly the opposite. I mean, at the end of the day, pretty much every distillery in Scotland sells casks of whiskey. Those that tell you that they don't are pretty much lying. At the end of the day, some sell less than others, and some won't allow you to use their name, some will teaspoon, and at the end of the day, it's all part of each individual distillery's economic model, I suppose. For some distilleries, they probably rely a little bit more on cask sales, and so you see a lot of independent bottlings of things like Craigellachie, Glentauchers, Miltonduff, Mortlach, Glentauchers, Fettercairn, Tobermory. There is a big list, and you see these whiskies at roughly about a similar kind of age, often being bottled by a number of different independent bottling companies. And I suppose when I'm evaluating those kind of whiskies, I'm kind of A, looking for quality, B, looking for whether I think they're ready for bottling, and C, do they offer me anything that I don't already have, if you see what I mean, given the fact that a number of the independents are bottling pretty much the same stuff. Same goes to a certain extent with the older whiskies. You often see batches of these older casks that are suddenly appearing in independents, and one imagines that a lot of the time it's maybe individuals that have purchased a batch of casks and then selling them on. Certainly there seems to be a fair amount of old Bunnahabhain knocking around at the moment, which not a bad thing in my opinion. I love old Bunnahabhain. There's a lot of George Dickel knocking around at the moment, albeit fairly youngish George Dickel, which you didn't see a few years ago. And conversely, there's less of other distilleries that you did see a number of years ago. You don't often come across so much independently bottled Macallan, for example, these days. And when you do, you pay through the nose for it. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about Skene. So Skene, like I said, established in 2014 by Andrew Skene, originally a broker, and I believe they exported whiskey to the rest of the world probably. And like a lot of these broking companies, they at some point they decided, well, we've got all these great casks of whiskey, well, let's bottle some under our own label. And they indeed did so, and I think they started doing that in about 2017. But there is, like a lot of companies, a bit of a backstory. There seems, like I probably mentioned in the past, it seems to be quite prevalent in gin. The gin producers will have some kind of interesting backstory that may or may not bear any relevance at all to their distillery or their product or what have you. And I'm not saying that the backstory with regards to Skene is excuse me, particularly irrelevant. You can make your own minds up about that. But anyway, it's an interesting one. And according to their website, legend has it, I love it when it starts with legend has it, that the younger son of the head of Clan Robertson, or Duncan as it was at the time, you Scots, you and your naming of your clans. Anyway, apparently he saved the life of the king, in inverted commas, well it doesn't say in inverted commas, but just the king, from a savage wolf. Now, it's a little bit sort of, who's this king then? So doing a bit of digging, and I think this king was actually Robert the Bruce, because the clan, which was called, and now I'm probably going to murder this name, Donasht, or Stout Duncan in English, was a faithful supporter of, apparently, of Robert the Bruce. Oh, incidentally, going back slightly, I missed out one very important fact, that this son of the head of the clan, Robertson, saved the life of the king with his Sayn Doob. I hope I pronounced that right. I probably haven't. And one would assume that it is some form of weapon, and I believe it is indeed a dagger, which is why there is a dagger on the label of the Skene Whisky. But we're kind of going to get there as to why. But anyway, this particular supporter of Robert the Bruce was a supporter of his during the War of Scottish Independence in 1306-ish. And apparently the clan asserts that the Stout Duncan's relatives, they were not actually yet known as Robertsons, and there probably is a reason which I can't remember, supported Robert the Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn. So anyway, the king was incredibly grateful for having his life saved from this vicious wolf, although he was a well-respected warrior in his own right and probably could have dealt with the wolf in his own way, but legend has it. So the king gifted him this plot of land in Aberdeenshire, which the son named Cheyenne or Skene. Yeah, there we go. So, because this was the weapon he used to save the king with, and whether this Andrew Skene is a descendant of that particular person, I have absolutely no idea. Maybe he's trying to say he is. Maybe it's just purely coincidence with regards to the surname. And the other link to this particular area in Aberdeenshire is allegedly that in the early 1800s it became an infamous route for smuggling whisky, so from the Highlands to the Lowlands. So there you go. That's an interesting bit of trivia, I suppose, whether you wish to believe it or not. That's fair enough, but at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, the only important issue with regards to today is, what does our whisky taste like, and is it good value for money? And I shall introduce today's lineup, and hopefully we shall find that out. Red dress and deep blue eyes. Right, okay, so when Skene contacted me and said, we do whisky, would you like to buy it? And I said, can you send me some samples? They kindly sent me 6 samples, which was the perfect amount for an episode of the show. And we're going to kick off with a Glentauchers. This is a 7-year-old bottle in their bottled in their Cask Classics range, distilled in October of 2008, bottled in June of 2016. It's a single bourbon hogshead, number 901220. So that's what we're going to start off with. Second bottling we'll be looking at is a Craigellachie, which can be a bit hit and miss, certainly at this kind of age. This is a 9-year-old. Again, distilled in May of 2008, bottled June 2017 from a single bourbon hoggy, that number 900310. So talking about sort of production of whiskey, if that's the sort of the number of casks that they've got through, then you can understand why Craigellachie sell a lot of their casks. The third bottling we'll be looking at is a good old Macduff. Now, you know what I think of Macduff. This is, again, an 8-year-old, distilled in March of 2009, bottled in June of 2017. Again, a single bourbon hoggy, and number 900273. And the next bottling we'll be looking at is a Miltonduff. And this, again, is bottled in the Skene Cask Classics range. Again, a 9-year-old, distilled in May of 2008, bottled in June 2017. Again, a single bourbon hogshead, number 900193. Interesting how they all seem to be roughly about the same. I don't know whether that they have been renumbered by Skene themselves, but they do seem to fall into a sort of numerical order. I mean, and certainly both Douglas Lang and Hunter Lang renumber all their casks, so I imagine that's possibly what they've done. Deep breath, it's Tobermory time for the penultimate whisky, yes, and young Tobermory at that. Again, another 9-year-old, distilled in December of 2008, bottled in June of 2017. Again, from a bourbon hoggy, number 110364. So, is this going to be old style Tobermory, or will this be modern style Tobermory? We shall find out. And finally, we're on to the old Booner. This is the one and only bottling that they sent me of their reserve range. So this is a 26-year-old Bunnahabhain, distilled in December of 1989 and bottled in November of 2016. Now allegedly all sold out. Again, a bourbon hoggy, and that number is 7731. So possibly in their reserve range they don't actually change the numbers. Maybe they do, I don't know. Anyway, so that's today's lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of Glentauchers. I can't resist, I can't escape, it's way too late. Let's kick off with the Glentauchers, 7 years old. Let's see what the nose gives us. It's a bit young, it's a bit raw, it's a bit cereally. And I think it probably could have done with a little bit longer in the cask. This is always the thing with young whiskies, and I mean the thing is nowadays, given the fact that your average 10-year-old is now pushing probably over 40 quid, you're looking at the independent sector for value for money for sub £40 whiskies. But you have to accept the fact that they're going to be a tad on the young side. Doesn't always mean that they're bad, but sometimes it means that they're just not quite ready. And I'm going to have to say that I think this, certainly from the nose, would indicate that it's a little bit raw at the moment. I mean, it's pleasant spirit, but there's not an awful lot else going on, and it doesn't quite have that sort of normal Glentauchers kind of granity hardness. It's just hasn't quite evolved as yet. Certainly not from a nasal point of view, shall we say? Yeah, and the alcohol's a little bit prickly as well. There is a little bit of sort of green fruit kind of coming out, a little bit of green gauge, that kind of thing. See what the palate's like. Oh, it's a bit of a tart finish, a bit of a short tart, ooh, grab you by the thingies kind of finish. Again, it's raw, it's cereally, there's a little bit of faintiness, there's a touch of white fruit, there's some minerality, there's some citrus. I think that the palate kind of just backs up what I thought of the nose, that it's just a little bit too young at this present moment in time. and maybe given a couple more years in the cask, certainly that sort of fainty element would have and the rawness of the cereal would have sort of dissipated to a certain extent. But you know, quality wise, not too bad, but it's certainly one that I wouldn't sort of opt to go for, shall we say. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Craigellachie. This is a 9-year-old Craigellachie. Let's see what nose gives us. Now that is a lovely nose. It's crisp, it's fresh, it's honeyed. There's barley, there's white fruit. Nice balance of oak vanillins as well. And I'm personally, I mean, I know Craigellachie can be very, very hit and miss. It can be sort of quite raw and a bit like the Glentauchers at this kind of age, but every now and again it can be sort of utterly delightful. And this is the nice thing about young whiskies, is they have that sort of youthful exuberance, that crisp freshness, that sort of intensity, and that is always what I'm looking for. It's got a relative amount of complexity for a young whisky. That, like I said, there's some oak input, there's some barley, some honey, some white fruit, and you know, I like this nose. I think this is a very, very appealing nose, and let's hope the palate is up to it then, shall we? Let's see. Kicks off with some lovely citrus. Oak comes in fairly quick, quite toffeed. Actually, there's a slightly sort of baked fruity kind of character happening on the mid palate, which kind of is a sort of market you kind of pick up with slightly older whiskies. That's why I would guess that it's kind of the oxidation, the interaction with the air, with the spirit, giving it that kind of sort of baked fruit kind of character. So this is kind of, I can see why this has been bottled, because it is showing a little bit more maturity than its years actually would suggest. Again, nicely citric, medium kind of length, bit grassy, bit granity, a little bit of lingering oak. Yeah, I like that. I think that's a lovely whisky. Like I said, it displays everything that you want from a young whisky. It's exuberant, it's crisp, it's fresh, and it's got a relative amount of complexity. And I mean, I can't remember what this would go on the shelf at, but it's going to be sub 40 quid. It's probably going to be around about sort of 38, 39.95, somewhere of that kind of ilk. And you know, I think that's certainly worth that money. Blonde hair, devil's green. Right, talking hit and miss, let's tackle the Macduff. Macduff can come in a number of guises, as you well and truly know, from quite pleasant to the truly awful. So let's see where this one sits. Pretty clean in actual fact. I mean, certainly there's no burnt rubber, there's no sort of like fustiness, there's no kind of well, I wouldn't quite say the usual Macduff characteristics, but shall we say the often found Macduff characteristics. It's got some pleasant green fruit, citrus, bit of green gage, maybe sort of gooseberry. There's a little bit of rawness in the background, a sort of a youthful kind of cereal character. It's okay. I mean, I suppose when you sort of taste whiskies that you don't exactly have a high opinion of, and they turn out to be maybe not exactly brilliant, but certainly not god awful, you know, it's a bit of a bonus, I suppose. And although if I didn't know what the distillery was, I would say it's relatively neutral. It's a bit sort of simple, it's okay. but knowing what the distillery is, you have to say, well, this is actually quite an improvement on a lot of their bottlings. Yeah, it's a little bit of a sort of perfumed edge now, but it is pretty much sort of simple and straightforward. But like I said, I think the emphasis should be put on the word clean. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. Yeah, it's got a pleasant spicy finish. Again, it's a bit simple, it's clean, it's got some pleasant citric notes. The oak is a little bit chunky and sort of a little bit kind of foursquare, shall we say. Some pleasant toffee moments. It's a little bit short, I suppose. It's kind of like, you know, I'm here, I'm gone, and but like I said, it's very clean. It's, you know, not your usual Macduff, and yeah, again, I think it's pleasant. It's not certainly a whiskey I would sort of think that I would want to put on the shelf, and you know, you might think I'm being a little bit harsh, a little bit disingenuous, but when you have, as you know from our shop, when you have limited amount of shelf space, what goes on that shelf has to be damn good at the end of the day. Doesn't matter whether it's 8 years old or 28 years old, it's still got to be damn good to basically warrant a place on the shelf. And I don't think I'm being kind of well, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but the point being is that I know a good whiskey when I come across it, and I know a good whiskey at what I would have to charge for it, and you know, it's got to replace something at the end of the day, hasn't it? And if I don't feel that it's kind of up to the level that I want, then I don't buy it. It's kind of as simple as that, you know. And although, like I said, it's not that the fact that the whiskey is poor quality. I mean, certainly, I think from a Macduff kind of point of view, that's bloody good. So, yeah, kind of backhanded compliment, if you see what I mean. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Miltonduff. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? That is a lovely nose. That is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, I love Miltonduff. Miltonduff is one of these whiskies, or one of the distilleries that does get away with bottling their stuff quite young. It has that wonderful, opulent, honey, heather, barley kind of character. That really does smell a lot older than what is it, 9 years old? I mean, that oak just has that sort of beginnings of that sawdusty maturity that I really, really love. Slightly herbal, a little bit of tea leaf almost, but oh, that oak is lovely. I mean, that was a damn good cask, it has to be said, and I think that is the big thing about a lot of young whiskies, is that they just haven't had the time to fully interact with the cask. And certainly if you're using a second or maybe even a third fill cask, you're not going to get a great deal of vanilla character from that wood, and you're just going to have to leave it for a little bit longer just to see if something does actually seep out. Sometimes at the end of the day, a cask will just give you absolutely nothing. It's just kind of worn out. But in this instance, I would probably say this has got to be at least a first fill cask, because it's just got such a lovely character. Oh, really heathery, really honeyed, and loads of character. That's lovely. Let's see what the palate's like. Whoa, lovely chewy malty finish. That is big, robust barley, loads of honey. I mean, if I was tasting that blind and I didn't know the age of that, I would say that that was at least double its age. It has that mature American oak kind of feel to it. Maybe that's why they opted to bottle it at this kind of age. Maybe if that had been left any longer, the oak might have become too intrusive. But it's absolutely gorgeous. Really long, again, classic Miltonduff, heathery, honeyed, little bit of citrus. You know, what is not to like about that whiskey? That is absolutely fantastic. And again, I imagine, given its age, it's probably going to be around about the £40 mark, and that is the sort of whiskey that I would happily recommend to people that love whiskey. It's absolutely fantastic. That is brilliant. It's on to my old nemesis then, a young Tobermory. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one then, shall we? Pretty clean in actual fact, and I think this is kind of like backing up, like I've probably said in the past when tasting young Lecce, that I think the distillery have obviously cleaned up their act. I think they've reduced their cut points. You're getting less faintiness, less cardboardiness, and well, you know, if they have listened to the critics, then, you know, brilliant, excellent. I mean, this is a lovely nose. And how many times have you heard me say that about Tobermory? It's coastal, it's fresh, it's citric, it's clean. There's a touch of cereal, a touch of toffee, some orange blossom, and unfortunately it's all bloody well sold out. The trouble was that I got these samples, oh God, when did I get this? Back end of April? Yeah, probably about April time. And because I was in the middle of our year end and all this kind of stuff, I just didn't have the time. I mean, I tasted them and thought, yeah, I'll get onto it in due course, and never did. And still haven't given them an order yet, but it will happen. And so unfortunately, the Tobermory and the Bunnahabhain are both kind of now sold out, and I can see why with this Tobermory. It's a lovely Tobermory. This is what Tobermory should be all about. It should be kind of fresh, citric, coastal, and it should be clean. That's what I want from Tobermory. And yeah, that's a lovely nose. Good cask. Let's see what the palate's like. That is a lovely balanced palate. Kicks off with the citrus and the coastal notes, and then in comes a bit of vanilla, a little bit of honey as well. Exits with a little bit of peat. That is what I want from Tobermory, and that, you know, I think what I'm going to have to do at some stage is I'm going to have to do an episode of the show on Tobermory and one on Lecce. I'm going to have to basically take the distillery bottlings and taste it against a range of independents, because, you know, there's been quite a number of bottlings over the years, and I've probably got them kind of stashed away somewhere in the naughty corner. No, honestly. But no, I think there's probably something I'm going to have to do at some stage, just to sort of see if that is indeed the case, that they really have kind of cleaned up their act, shall we say. But anyway, coming back to this whiskey, that I can see why this one is completely sold out, because, you know, if you're used to Tobermory being its usual cardboardy horrible self, and you then come and taste that, you're going, what? Have they switched the names? But no, it's pretty damn good, it has to be said. I can't resist, I can't escape, it's way too late. Right, finally we're on to the Buna. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Ooh, is that a gorgeous nose or what? Classic old Buna, it has to be said. Dusty American oak, apricots, almost kind of verging on the tropical. There's a bit of melon, there's some lime, there's a touch of kiwi, little bit of almost gingery spice. Lovely balance between the maturity and the fresher elements, the sort of citric elements, and that's one of the things I love about Old Boona. It does age in American oak absolutely amazingly well. It still retains some of that lovely fragrant character that it has when it's young, and you get, you know, mature sort of American oak and a bit of earth and a bit of peat. Very subtle, it has to be said, on the peat. It's almost kind of just like a slight whiff of smoke. A little bit of nuts. Elegance, really, really nice. I mean, yes, you know, this is not going to be cheap. I mean, we're talking about £200. But, you know, when somebody wants to spend that kind of money, you know, I've got no issue with recommending a bottling such as this. And this is, absolute heaven, absolutely gorgeous. Let's see what the palate goes. Light, elegant, bottled I think in the nick of time, as it's only bottled at 42.5. I think if that had been left any longer and had slipped pretty much towards 40%, I think that might have just kind of become a little bit too watery, but it's just on the line at the moment. Lovely, delicate, elegant, slightly tropical, like I said, melon, kiwi, apricot, apple, dusty American oak. Absolutely gorgeous. I mean, yes, I've come across fuller bodied and old Boonas, but this just has a lovely delicacy to it. And like I said, I think it was just bottled absolutely at the right time, and that's just absolutely divine. Really, really nice. What more can you say? Right, okay, so let's sum this week's episode of the show. Firstly, a really big thank you to Skene Whisky for kindly sending me the samples, and they will appear at some stage on the shelves at Gauntleys, it has to be said. And you know, like every independent bottling company, they bottle some stuff that I really, really like and some stuff that I'm maybe not quite so fussed about. It is part of the course, it has to be said. And I must admit, the Glentauchers is one of those ones that I just thought was, like I said, a little bit too young, needs a bit more time in the cask for me personally, and if it was up to me, I wouldn't have bottled it yet. I don't. That's pretty much all that needs to be said. Craigellachie, I think that was a lovely Craigellachie. You know, like I said, it ticked all the right boxes as far as, you know, young whiskies for me are concerned. Lots of fresh character, yeah, like I said, I think that was an absolutely lovely whiskey. The Macduff, I think you can look at that in two ways. Like I said, as a Macduff, very, very nice, very good, very clean, no impurities. As a whiskey in its own right, yeah, it was a bit simple, and you know, I think I've certainly, with regards to maybe the Craigellachie, I think it's just got far more interest and complexity. But like I said, for a young Macduff, pretty damn good. The Miltonduff absolutely stole the show as far as I'm concerned. Certainly of the 46% bottlings, just absolutely gorgeous, rich, deep, honeyed, lots of complexity for its age, and you know, felt like it was double its age. So you know, one can get hold of that, then an absolute bargain. The Tobermory, a lovely Tobermory, just what Tobermory should be in my personal opinion, and I think that was just absolutely spot on. And the Bunnahabhain, I think lovely, elegant, bottled just in the nick of time, shall we say, and unfortunately all kind of sold out now. So you know, that one won't go on the shelf. But I think overall, you know, a really interesting tasting, and yeah. So that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Next week, I think I got an interesting tasting up my sleeve, and I got another one after that, and another one after that as well. So anyway, that's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the show. Keep your comments going, and I really appreciate those. And I do read them all, and I try and reply to them all. So anyway, until next time, good afternoon and good ramming.